After I was fired from the state-owned clothing factory, I married Chris and remained faithful to him for 40 years. On his 70th birthday, I walked in carrying a cake, only to catch him in the act with his childhood sweetheart, Lauren. She fled in panic, while Chris choked on his breath and died right there on the spot. But when our son threw the family genealogy book in my face, I found out Chris had already named Lauren as his successor long ago. Dad said the two of you never consummated your marriage, my son spat. You're not entitled to any inheritance. Aunt Lauren and I are the rightful heirs. But if you're willing to kneel down and serve her tea, we'll write you in as an honored dependent. Then when you die, you'll be buried at their feet. Humiliated beyond words, I collapsed in rage and died right then and there. But when I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day Chris lost his manhood. My head was splitting, and my thoughts were a tangled mess, but I could hear Chris's voice sharply. To save you, I gave up the thing most precious to a man. You destroyed my lower body, so now you owe me the rest of your life. I jerked my head up and met Chris's eyes, cold, full of hatred and calculation. That voice, that expression. I suddenly noticed the outdated hospital room and the white cloth between his legs, soaked with blood. Oh my God, I had been reborn 40 years into the past. This was the very day I got fired for negligence at the state-run clothing factory, the day Chris dragged me into a lifetime of misery. Overwhelmed with emotion, I stood frozen. But Chris, noticing I wasn't responding, scowled and suddenly hurled a steaming bowl of herbal medicine at me. It's getting windy. Why aren't you running to the factory to bring Lauren a warm jacket? Screwing me over isn't enough for you. You want Lauren to get sick too? If this costs her the chance to go full-time, I swear I'll skin you alive. Memories came flooding back, 40 years of being used and humiliated by these two people. The anger and absurdity of it all nearly made my chest explode. Why should I be your servant? Why should I waste the rest of my life on you? You're already a cripple. Why should a woman throw her life away taking care of you? Maybe I should just find you a sweet man to wait on you instead. Chris stared at me in disbelief, his face pale, stammering, You said you'd serve me for life. You were crying and begging me. You can't go back on your word. The whole factory heard you. Don't think I won't report you to the supervisor. Seeing how furious he was made me laugh. I've already been fired. What do I care if you report me? I said I'd take care of you, not because I liked you, and I never once said anything about marriage. In my previous life, when the industrial sewing machine at the factory malfunctioned, Chris had reacted quickly and pushed me out of the way. His lower body was crushed in the accident. He was never able to function as a man again. I was incredibly grateful, and since my family always had a good impression of him, I offered to marry him, to give him some security for the rest of his life. Chris lost his manhood, and I kept myself pure for him for 40 years, without a word of complaint. Until that day, when I caught 70-year-old Chris riding Lauren, his childhood flame, like a man half his age. So much for loyalty. Chris would rather be seen as a useless loser with no manhood than let go of me, the woman who had ruined him. Also, Lauren could secure her full-time position at the factory. I grabbed the white cloth from between his legs. Didn't you want to go back to the factory? Fine. Let's go ask them what really caused that sewing machine to break in the first place. Chris shrank into the corner of the hospital bed, clutching his groin in fear. I don't care why it broke. You were the operator. You were responsible. Everyone knows you owe me your life. Any man who marries you will have to serve me too. And don't forget, your grandmother was our village's model woman. If I go public with this, let's see if she doesn't drown in people's spit. That bastard had the nerve to bring up my grandma. She was proud and strong her whole life. My parents died young, and she raised me with everything she had, hoping I'd grow up useful and independent. When she learned I'd been fired from the factory and was planning to marry Chris out of guilt, she collapsed for the first time in her life. She lost her spirit. Because of me, Grandma ended up being treated like a maid by Chris's family. She worked herself to death over more than a decade. On her deathbed, she looked at me through tears of blood and said she was sorry to my parents. But none of this was her fault. It was mine. My soft heart and weakness let that scumbag Chris trample me for 40 years. I grabbed the fruit knife off the nightstand and pointed it straight at his groin. When that sewing machine fell, my hands weren't even on the control panel. I'm not taking the blame for your injury. And as for how it broke, nobody really knows now, do they? But I knew exactly what was in Chris's heart for Lauren. As for that thing of his, he didn't need to worry. I promised I'd get it cured for him. When I saw fear take over his face and fluids leak between his legs, I finally threw the knife away in disgust, slammed the door, and left. When I got home, my grandmother, with her hair graying at the temples, was coughing while tremblingly adding firewood to the stove, brewing herbal medicine. She was at the age when she should have been enjoying life, yet here she was, still looking after a shameless scumbag pretending to be sick, all because of me, her disappointing granddaughter. Tears surged uncontrollably, and I ran into her arms, wailing loudly. Go back. Claire, why are you crying? She asked, worried as she cupped my tear-streaked face. Was it him? Was it his injury? I held her hands and sobbed, Grandma, again and again. Thank God time had rewound. Thank God I'd been reborn on this very day. The regret of wanting to repay my elders, but being too late, weighed heavily in my chest. Swallowing down the sting in my nose, I took the bowl of herbal medicine and poured it straight onto the flames. Watching the fire go out, I said, Grandma, I'm done bowing to them. If the factory won't take me back, so be it. The world's big enough. There has to be a place for me. Since I was a child, my grandma had never cared what the neighbors said. Even though I was just a girl, an outsider to the family, she poured all her love and effort into raising me. She was a talented seamstress, often working late into the night crafting beautiful chapaos, but she always wore patched-up coats herself. The money she'd saved up, which she could have used to prepare her own funeral, was spent entirely on my education. So what if you're a girl, she used to say. Girls can study, gain skills, and contribute to the proletariat too. Because I knew her hopes were riding on me, I never dared to slack off in school. Even in the freezing depths of winter, my frostbitten hands would clutch my textbooks as I memorized them over and over again. In my past life, after years of hard work, I finally became an apprentice at the clothing factory. I was on the verge of becoming a full-time worker and securing a lifelong job. But the accident with the sewing machine changed everything. I was fired in disgrace, and my entire future was shattered. Chris had only injured his lower half, but he went on as if his soul had been destroyed, claiming he was too weak to lift or carry anything. After we married, I didn't just have to wait on him hand and foot. I also had to serve over 20 members of his extended family. Every day, I got up before the rooster and went to bed after the dogs. Chris couldn't perform as a man anymore, so naturally, I could never have a child of my own. Instead, we adopted a boy from a relative in the family. But even though I humbled myself, worked hard, and never complained, Chris still treated me like garbage. He never gave me a kind look. He even forbade our son from calling me Mom. Those 40 years were a living nightmare. I would think about that moment again and again, when the sewing machine came crashing down. I could never understand why it happened. I hadn't even touched the controls. That machine had never had a single malfunction before, so why had it failed so catastrophically? For years after I was fired, I would return to the factory trying to find out what happened. Was it really a mechanical failure? Did any other machine ever break down like that? Could it have been sabotage? At first, some of my old coworkers would still talk to me. They offered a few comforting words. But as time went on, they got tired of me, the bitter woman they believed had ruined a good man's life. She operated it wrong, they'd whisper. She crippled him. Now she's just trying to dodge the blame. She was just a temp. She caused that huge mess. If I were her, I'd have thrown myself into a wall from the shame. Can you believe she still has the nerve to show up here? People like her, hurting the collective like that, should be locked up. Every time I heard these cruel words, it felt like needles stabbing straight into my chest. I had worked diligently on the factory line. I never slacked off, not even for a minute. Why did I deserve this humiliation? It wasn't until I was reborn that it finally clicked. In our workshop, only 2 women had clean family records and were eligible to be promoted to full-time workers. Me and Lauren. On the surface, Lauren was off that day and had nothing to do with the accident. But after I was fired, she was the one who got the full-time position. The biggest beneficiary, Chris's beloved childhood sweetheart. That's when I realized the machine's failure might really have been sabotage. But it definitely wasn't me. Wiping away my tears, I wrapped a scarf around my head and snuck quietly back to the clothing factory through an empty trail. I didn't go to the usual workshop. Instead, I carefully avoided the security patrols and slipped into the men's changing room. There, among rows of hanging uniforms, I pulled out a gray, dusty work coat and held it up to the light. Just as I suspected, the right cuff was stained, a smudge clearly embedded in the fabric. It was the sticky black residue unique to sewing machine lubricant. Clutching the filthy sleeve, a cold and sinister suspicion bloomed in my heart. Just then I heard a faint click. The changing room door handle turned. I froze in place. 1 second, 2. 3 seconds later, the door opened and a tall figure slipped inside. Claire? What are you doing here? Matthew, why is it you? I came to bring lunch to my dad. Actually, no, I quit. I'm here to settle my wages. After a brief exchange, Matthew insisted on walking me home to visit my grandmother. But the moment we reached the street corner, a loud, angry clamor erupted in the distance. A crowd had gathered at my front door, pointing and gossiping animatedly. My chest tightened. Grandma! I shoved my way through the onlookers and rushed inside. In the yard, Chris was being carried on a stretcher by several of his relatives. His parents were spewing spit and curses at my grandmother. You old hag, do you know who ruined my son's manhood? Your damn granddaughter. And now she wants to break off the engagement? She's dreaming. This wedding is happening, like it or not. We're not giving a single penny for bride price, and your house is going to be the dowry. My frail grandmother trembled all over with rage at their shameless words, struggling to straighten her back to speak for me. Your son sacrificed himself to save my granddaughter. We'll remember that. We'll repay it. But even the country supports free love now. How can you force her to marry? Hearing her choked-up voice shattered my heart. I grabbed a thick pearwood stick from the corner, pushed through the crowd of gawking neighbors, and stood protectively in front of my grandmother. Who gave you the right to yell in our house? Chris's relatives, seeing me show up, immediately stepped forward, ready to get physical. Tension flared. Just then, Matthew stepped between us. With a calm but commanding voice, he said, I'm Matthew Chen, a medical student at the Provincial Medical University. I specialize in diagnostics and complex conditions. Why not let me take a look at Chris? My heart skipped a beat. I quickly shot him a look, silently begging him not to get involved in this mess. But he met my eyes with a reassuring glance, then calmly took out a medical kit with a red cross from his backpack. As the only university student from our village, Matthew's words carried weight. The onlookers quieted and stepped back to give Dr. Matt space. However, the moment Chris heard this, he panicked and clutched his crotch. No need, I'm already ruined. There's nothing to treat, I just need rest for the rest of my life. But his parents latched onto this lifeline like it was their last hope. They grabbed their son and pushed him forward. You have to try. What if there's still a chance? Our family's future depends on you continuing the bloodline. Outnumbered and outmatched, Chris was carried into our inner room by several eager relatives. Watching him get his pants pulled down, I couldn't help but curl my lips into a cold smile. While pretending to close the curtain, I left a palm-sized gap on purpose. Several curious neighbors on tiptoe immediately got the message and leaned in to peek through the window. Matthew, his expression serious, pulled on his medical gloves and began examining Chris's lower body. He carefully inspected and palpated the injury, then patted Chris's thigh, signaling that he needed to perform a digital exam. Chris turned pale and stammered, It's the front that's hurt. Why are you poking around back there? Unfazed, Matthew replied matter-of-factly, This is a standard prostate exam. It's necessary for assessing reproductive function. Chris erupted, cursing loudly. You bastard! Claire put you up to this, didn't she? You're just trying to humiliate and torture me. Matthew didn't flinch. Coldly, he replied, Do you understand what it means to follow a physician's orders? In the hospital, patients who refuse to cooperate are restrained. As soon as he said that, one of Chris's relatives chimed in thoughtfully, Yeah. When my son went in for his army medical exam, they did this too. Only real men react. It was like lighting a fuse. Chris's parents' eyes lit up with hope. They ordered the others to pin Chris down. No matter how hard he screamed and thrashed like a slaughtered pig, they held him tight, pried his legs apart, and fully exposed the indecent truth. Matthew didn't hesitate. He pushed his gloved middle finger inside. Chris let out a blood-curdling scream, but Matthew remained calm, his finger probing with precision, unmoved by the commotion. Only after Chris was soaked in sweat and limp with exhaustion did he slowly withdraw his finger. Chris's father and mother rushed up eagerly. "Dr. Matt, what do you think?" "Can it still be treated?" someone asked. Matthew looked troubled. "It can be treated," he admitted, "but the process might be a bit unpleasant. I'm just not sure the patient will be cooperative." "It must be treated," Chris's father cut in firmly. "If he refuses, I'll skin him alive." Matthew nodded, seemingly relieved. "Then I recommended ginger enema." The entire Scott family stared at him, confused. "What's an enema?" someone finally asked. Matthew patiently explained. "We grind fresh ginger into a fine paste, then pour boiling water over it. Once the ginger water cools to a warm temperature, we inject it into the rectum. It's a powerful stimulation therapy." Chris's mother went pale. Just imagining the burning ginger juice going up there gave everyone the chills. After watching the show for a while, I couldn't resist joining in. If this concerns Chris, then it concerns me. I'll go peel 2 pounds of ginger. Chris was so terrified he practically flew out of the bed, using both hands and feet to break free from his relatives. He tried to scramble away, but his father struck him with a thunderous slap that left him dizzy. His relatives quickly pinned him back down. His mother, unable to bear it any longer, hesitated. "Isn't this a bit too much? Dr. Matt, is there another option?" Matthew sighed and pointed solemnly. "Well, then we'll have to rely on that." Everyone turned to look at the thick pearwood stick still in my hand. Matthew looked seriously at Chris's parents. "So what's it going to be? The enema or the stick? You choose." "I don't agree," Chris screamed, completely unraveling under the pressure of losing his backdoor dignity. I'm not actually injured. I was faking." Tears streaming down his face, Chris stammered his confession. "Claire, I only did it because I love you too much. I was afraid you wouldn't marry me, so I came up with this plan to win your sympathy." He wasn't even done speaking when the crowd of neighbors peeking through the window exploded in laughter and jeers. What kind of grown man tells a lie about his own limp junk? This is marriage fraud, plain and simple. Love her? More like love having her wait on him, and bringing his whole family to cause trouble. Unbelievable. That family's full of schemers. They almost pushed a perfectly good girl into a fire pit. The insults rained down mercilessly. Chris's parents flushed red, then white, wanting nothing more than to sink into the ground and disappear. His relatives, flustered, quickly threw the sobbing Chris back onto the stretcher and fled without daring to look back. Once the crowd of onlookers had dispersed, the tension in my chest finally loosened. I turned to look at Matthew's steady, dependable face, filled with gratitude. "Thank goodness you know medicine. You exposed Chris's lies. Otherwise, I don't know how much longer I would have been trapped by him. My whole life might have been ruined." Matthew chuckled softly and pulled something from his pocket, a green student ID. "I wouldn't say I know medicine, I only know a little." I looked down at the ID. On its cover was the name of a certain medical university, and clearly printed below, Department of Veterinary Medicine. After that farcical marriage fiasco with Chris, my life finally settled down, for a while. Although I still hadn't uncovered the real cause behind the sewing machine malfunction, what mattered most now was finding a new job to survive. One day, Matthew mentioned something he saw during training in the county town. "Claire, you wouldn't believe it. Those little clothing stalls by the roadside? Packed. People can't even squeeze in to take a look." My heart stirred. I thought of the exquisite chipaos Grandma used to make, sold cheap to shops in the county, who resold them at ridiculous prices. Maybe I could get into that game as a middlewoman. And with all my years at the clothing factory, I knew fabrics, cuts, and tailoring like the back of my hand. My eye for quality was leagues ahead of your average street vendor. So I decided to go for it. Every morning before dawn, I'd pedal my tricycle to a spot near the county train station and set up a small stall selling fashionable women's clothing. When Matthew wasn't busy, he often came along to keep me company. Despite being a fancy university student, he didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance. In fact, he pitched our products even louder than I did. The two of us made quite the team. Our banter so natural that passers-by constantly mistook us for a married couple. Wow, what a handsome guy and such a pretty girl. You two are perfect together. You shouldn't be selling clothes. You should be modeling in a photo studio. Back in the day, my wife and I started off selling from a street stall just like this. Now our kids are old enough to run errands. Customers would joke as they browsed our clothes. Every time someone said something like that, Matthew and I would blush to the ears, though deep down, those innocent comments stirred up some strange, unspoken feelings between us. While my little business was booming, Chris's life was falling apart. Word of his fake injury and attempted marriage scam spread across every town and village nearby. People couldn't stop pointing fingers at him behind his back. To make things worse, Matthew's examination had been thorough. So thorough that Chris ended up with a minor tear back there. He couldn't even walk properly without bow-legged stiffness, drawing even more stares and ridicule whenever he left the house. Eventually, he stopped going out altogether. Lauren did visit him a few times at first, but Chris's parents, clearly desperate, jumped at the chance to push her into the role of their future daughter-in-law. Everywhere they went, they wouldn't shut up about how much Lauren cared for Chris, dropping hints left and right that she was destined to marry into the family. Their shameless meddling, combined with Chris's pitiful and pathetic state, scared Lauren off for good. After that, she never stepped foot in their house again. Thinking back to my past life, after Chris's injury, he shamelessly lived off the factory's disability benefits and never worked another day. He had money, he had time, but he never once thought to help out or share the burden. Instead, he snuck around with Lauren behind my back, indulging in some bourgeois fantasy life. When he turned 50, Lauren found herself a wealthy old man and dumped him. Chris, devastated, got drunk and stumbled into a manure pit, ending up paralyzed for months. I was the one who stayed by his side, hair turning white as I nursed him back from the brink of death, never leaving his side even once. The most laughable part? The moment Lauren got dumped, Chris came crawling back to her like a damn lapdog, completely forgetting everything I had done for him. These disgraceful memories reminded me every single day that I owed no sympathy to either of them. That day, business was especially good, so I packed up early and pedaled my tricycle home, humming a little tune as I went. But the moment I saw the figure waiting at my door, my good mood vanished into thin air. It was Chris. Judging by the way he stood, his injuries had clearly healed. The second he saw me, he rushed over with a ridiculous grin on his face, holding a garishly red scarf in his hands. "Claire, it's cold out. You're not dressed warm enough. Here, take this. I bought it just for you." I didn't even try to be polite. I shoved him away. "Get lost. Who wants your filthy trash?" But Chris stepped right back up, still smiling like an idiot. "Claire, come on. I did save you, didn't I? Sure, maybe I wasn't really hurt, but there was blood, right? You can't be that heartless." I couldn't believe he had the audacity to bring that up. My suspicions of him had never gone away, and lately, with Matthew's help, I'd been trying to dig deeper into what really caused the sewing machine malfunction. Still, I wasn't ready to tip my hand and alert him too soon. My expression turned cold. "I paid your medical bills myself. My grandmother even sent over 7 or 8 roosters to cook into soup for your recovery. If there ever was a debt, our family paid it in full. From now on, we owe each other nothing." But I had underestimated how shameless Chris could be. He slicked back his greasy hair and pulled out what he must have thought was a charming smile. "Why are you talking about debts and payments? If nothing else, we've still got our feelings, right? Look at us. We're a perfect match, made for each other. You'd be the ideal wife for the Scott family. Our family tree is just missing someone like you." Bullshit. In my past life, I wasted 40 years of youth on his damn family. And even then, he never considered me worthy of a place on that precious family tree. In the end, all I got was a footnote, an honored outsider. And now he was dangling some fake fantasy about me being his perfect partner? Like he was royalty and I was supposed to be his queen? I didn't waste another second arguing. I turned around, grabbed the pearwood stick by the door, pointed it right at his nose. Say one more word of that crap, and I swear I'll shove this stick so far up your... That must have hit a nerve, because Chris's face turned beet red. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a single word. I figured that would finally send him packing. But trash never travels alone. Chris, are you okay? I was so worried about you. Lauren suddenly appeared from who knows where, dressed to the nines like she was about to walk a runway. She must have been eavesdropping for a while. Lauren casually slid her arm through Chris's and glanced at me with a sideways smirk. Some people just bring trouble wherever they go. Can't do their job right, and still manage to drag others down. Ever heard of self-reflection? In this life, Lauren and I hadn't clashed directly yet. But in my previous life, she constantly showed up at my door, riding on Chris's backing, hurling insults and humiliating me in public. All the resentment I had bottled up for an entire lifetime erupted in that moment. I raised my hand and slapped her across the face. Lauren clutched her swelling cheek in shock, eyes wide. The next second, tears welled up as she flung herself into Chris's arms, sobbing. Chris finally snapped out of it. His face turned an ugly shade of gray as he shielded her and glared at me with fury. "Claire, what the hell is wrong with you? You dare lay a finger on Lauren?" He sneered, his voice laced with venom. "Your grandfather was a bottom-rung opera clown. Your parents were nothing but drunken scum that everyone despised. Filth breeds filth. What did anyone expect from you?" That did it. My vision went red with rage. I gripped the pearwood stick in my hand and without hesitation swung it at both Chris and Lauren. They shrieked and dodged, but they didn't back down. Chris grabbed a chunk of broken brick from the ground and hurled it at me. Chaos exploded in our front yard. Just then, the screech of brakes cut through the noise. A sleek luxury sedan pulled up smoothly in front of our house. The car door opened and Matthew stepped out first, tall and composed. Behind him came an older man with white hair but sharp, commanding eyes. Our scuffle came to a sudden halt. Matthew rushed forward and shielded me, now bruised and scraped behind his back. Pointing at Chris and Lauren, he shouted, "You two are completely out of control." Chris, still bitter over his previous humiliation, had long held a grudge against Matthew. Seeing him so protective of me now only made it worse. He snapped, "I knew you were screwing this whore. You humiliated me on purpose last time. Fine, I'll beat the both of you today." He raised the brick again, but before it left his hand, a deep, authoritative voice boomed, "Go ahead, I dare you." Another man stepped out of the car, dressed in a traditional Zhongshan suit. It was Matthew's father, Mr. Chen, party secretary of the clothing factory. Chris's disability compensation had yet to be officially approved and still required Mr. Chen's signature. Seeing him in the flesh now, Chris's bravado crumbled. He quietly dropped the brick. Matthew gently patted my shoulder. In a low voice, he said, "We brought in Professor Huang, a forensic trace expert from the provincial lab. He'll get to the bottom of the sewing machine incident, and you'll get the justice you deserve." Back at the factory, Mr. Chen summoned the entire workforce and formally announced that the investigation into the accident would be reopened. The first person to object, no surprise, was Chris. He immediately fired off a sarcastic tone. "Didn't we already conclude that the accident was Claire's fault? Why dig it up again? Is the factory trying to weasel out of paying my injury compensation?" Lauren jumped in right behind him. "Exactly. Chris was seriously injured because of this. The factory only gave him a measly stipend, and now they want to go back on even that? How can the workers not lose faith in leadership?" Their words were inflammatory. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and some workers began nodding in agreement. But Mr. Chen had been in leadership far too long to be rattled by such tricks. He exchanged a subtle glance with his son. Matthew stepped forward and raised a clear evidence bag high above his head. "According to regulations, any employee injured on the job has the right to claim compensation," Matthew said. "But if someone intentionally damages state-owned property for personal gain, they must be held accountable under the law." Inside the bag was the factory uniform I had found in the men's locker room, the one Chris wore the day of the accident. The phrase "damaging state property" hit Chris like a needle through the ear. His face went rigid, his lips pressed tight. He stared at the uniform in the bag, clearly panicking. But after a beat, he doubled down. "You stole my uniform? I wasn't even wearing that one the day I got hurt." Matthew didn't respond. He just continued holding the bag high, letting every factory worker get a clear look. The dark, oily stain on the sleeve was plainly visible. Professor Huang stepped forward. Pointing to the stain, he explained, "After analysis, this lubricant matches exactly with the type used on our sewing machines. Furthermore, the stain's shape and position align perfectly with the reinforced screw points on the machines." There was a beat of silence as the workers looked at one another. At first, they were puzzled. Then realization dawned across their faces. Chris was just a garment mover at the factory. He never operated sewing machines. So how did machine lubricant end up on his uniform? Before anyone could answer, a quick-witted worker blurted out, "Chris, did you break the sewing machine on purpose, fake an injury, and try to scam the factory for compensation?" Voices of suspicion rose in waves. "He's always been sneaky and lazy," someone added. "Wouldn't surprise me one bit if he pulled something like this. And don't forget the fake marriage stunt. His morals are rotten. They should really investigate him properly." I stood there coldly, watching it all unfold. The weight of doubt pressing in from every direction nearly crushed Chris. His face turned purple, veins popping with panic. Suddenly, he whipped around and pointed at Mr. Chen and Matthew. "You two, what's your relationship with Claire? You're not family. Why are you working so hard to help her? What? Did she bribe you? Or are you just hoping to get in bed with that slut?" He directed the last line straight at me. There was no way I'd let that slide. "Slut your damn leg," I snarled. The pearwood stick that had been in my grip this whole time finally came into use. I rammed it straight between Chris's legs. And just like that, for the second time in a month, Chris collapsed in the factory floor, clutching his crotch. But this time, no one rushed to help him. Everyone just watched. His tantrum had finally crossed the line. Even Mr. Chen's expression turned cold. Clearly, he had lost all patience. His voice was sharp as a blade. "The factory's administrative wing is under 24-hour surveillance. If there's any suspicion of misconduct, the facts will speak for themselves." He called for the head of security to pull up surveillance footage, showing my visits to the office wing. The video played in front of everyone. As expected, there was no footage of me handing anyone bribes, and certainly no footage of inappropriate interactions between me and the Chens. But the corner of one frame captured something else entirely. Chris and Lauren, during work hours, sneaking into a stairwell. Chris's hand slipped inside her waistband, groping deep. Lauren didn't resist. Instead, she giggled coyly, clearly enjoying it. Gasps spread through the crowd. Lauren, for once, lowered her head in embarrassment. But Chris, not a shred of shame on his face. He looked around with an "I don't care" smirk. "So what? Even if we were fooling around, is that a crime? We're adults, it's called free love." He scoffed. "You're all just dodging the real issue. Where's the proof I broke that machine? If you can't prove it, I demand my compensation, every penny." Just as Chris thought he might weasel out, a young repairman named Leo hesitantly raised his toolbox. My screwdriver and pliers had machine oil on them a while back. I didn't say anything, but I always clean my tools thoroughly after use. I think someone stole them." He paused, then looked straight across the room at Chris. "He's my dorm mate." Chris snapped like a cornered animal. "Bullshit. Don't accuse me. You're just mad because you had a crush on Lauren and I beat you to her. Sour grapes." Leo wasn't having it. He lunged forward, ready to fight. But Professor Huang cut in, calm and firm. "No need to argue. Let the evidence speak." He ordered the damaged sewing machine to be brought into the room. With expert hands, he inspected the key screws, noting the specific scratch patterns left behind. They match exactly with the tools used by Comrade Leo. The grooves, shape, depth, all of it. It was irrefutable. A mountain of evidence. Chris turned ghostly pale, but he still clung to his last line of defense. "So what? Who says I used his tools? Maybe he planted the evidence. I'd seen enough." I stepped forward and cut him off coldly. "I already went to the police. The forensic lab at the provincial university has fingerprint analysis technology. Once they test the tools and machine parts, it'll be crystal clear if your prints are on them." The words fingerprint and police hit Chris like a death sentence. His knees buckled and he fell to the ground, crawling toward Mr. Chen in desperation, stammering nonsense as he begged for mercy. But before he could get close, two security officers moved in swiftly and restrained him, one on each side. A patrol car was already waiting outside the factory gates. Afterward, the factory leadership unanimously agreed to reinstate me at my old post, and even promised me a full-time permanent position as compensation. But after my time hustling on the streets, I had tasted the freedom and seen the bigger world of business. I'd already envisioned a new life for myself. So, I politely declined the promotion. Instead of returning to the factory job, I negotiated directly with the management and secured a sizable compensation package. Using that startup capital, I leased a storefront near the county train station and, relying on my market instincts and grandma's masterful sewing skills, I launched a custom qipao business. Matthew also found work in the county, taking a job as a veterinarian at the local zoo. Every morning, he rode his bicycle with me on the back, pedaling into town with the sunrise, and every evening, we rode home together under the glow of the setting sun. Sometimes, I'd bump into former coworkers from the clothing factory. They loved to tease me. "Boss lady, don't forget your sisters when you hit it big." I'd laugh heartily and reply, "Relax, I could never forget. Come get your qipaos made and I'll give you 50% off." Whether I'd ever actually hit it big was still unknown. But one thing was for sure. Chris had well and truly fallen. He was sentenced to 10 years of labor reform for damaging state-owned property and locked up in the county's first prison. Despite his usual bravado outside, once he was behind bars with the real thugs, he curled up like a frightened little quail. Worse yet, there were inmates from our own village inside that prison. Word about his little inspection episode, when he was publicly examined and exposed as impotent, spread like wildfire and quickly became the most talked-about joke in the entire block. Chris became a living punching bag, stripped naked and forced to stand, beaten with slipper soles, even subjected to far worse indignities on a regular basis. I heard he tried to end his life several times, but was always saved at the last minute. After each attempt, the cell bullies, now angered by the consequences, just made their torture more creative, more hidden, and more brutal. Then one day, a siren wailed. An ambulance pulled out of the prison and rushed Chris to the county hospital. The diagnosis was shocking. Both the front and back of his lower body had been completely destroyed. His parents watched their eldest son become a cripple. When they learned he had schemed to frame me just to help Lauren steal my promotion opportunity, they turned their rage on her, just like they had once done to me. They demanded she marry Chris and spend the rest of her life serving him. But Lauren wasn't about to jump into that pit of fire. To escape the relentless harassment from the Scott family, she quickly latched on to a wealthy businessman. The Scott family, intimidated by the man's power and resources, had no choice but to back off. But her good fortune didn't last long. That man was already married. His wife, having somehow caught wind of the affair, stormed into our little county from down south, furious beyond words. In front of the entire clothing factory staff, the furious wife stripped Lauren naked and beat her senseless. Lauren was utterly disgraced. That very day she resigned in shame and slunk back home. One afternoon I sat in my bright, clean qipao boutique, leisurely snacking on sunflower seeds. A few old coworkers from the factory came by to chat, their conversations buzzing with gossip and curiosity. They recounted the aftermath in vivid detail. How Chris's injuries were so severe, he'd spend the rest of his life walking around with a colostomy bag. How Lauren's public humiliation had become so widespread that even her own parents disowned her and kicked her out of the house. Listening to them talk, with that faint trace of amusement and pity in their voices, I felt nothing. The people and traumas that once haunted me like a nightmare had finally dissipated like smoke in the wind. I turned to the window and looked outside. The sunlight in this life was just so warm, so bright, so beautiful.